Good morning, colleagues. Once again, Happy New Year. And it is a great honor to have you on Humanist TV Africa on the last day of the month, 31st January 2025. I trust it is not any harm to once again wish you a happy 2025 and a progressive one, a knowledgeable one, and informative one. So once again, you're welcome to the series of our Humanist TV Africa programs on consumer safety, consumer welfare. So ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the global world, we welcome you. As we always come in to use Uganda as a case study, I would like to thank the management of the Humanist TV Africa for providing this platform and for the partnership to make sure that we add value to the lives of consumers wherever you are, maximizing the voices of the consumers to change, influence policies so that we have got effective consumer protection and better business to provide goods and services to consumers. Having said that, I would like to thank you for traveling the journey with us. We trekked 2024 with a number of theories on issues that impact the lives of consumers. We touched food safety, food fraud, aflatoxin in food and feed, agroecology. We touched consumer rights. We touched aspects to do with food safety in unexpected circumstances. We touched digital financial services. We touched communication. We unpacked the consumer voices of the first report that we launched in Uganda, and the voices in there touched issues to do with transport, electricity, health, issues to do with health and environment, water and sanitation, issues to do with digital finance, markets, customer care, education, you name it. The consumer voices touched it. And what is inspiring that some of these issues are that we look at from a Ugandan perspective have got a global face. Consumers globally are affected in a similar manner, irrespective of being in different regions. And issues that we touch on the Humanist TV series touch every facet of humanity, touch the daily lives, touch the productivity, touch the central nerve of consumer existence, touch the central nerve of the economies, touch the environment. So these are very key aspects that we need to look at. Some of the things seem to be systematic, either to fail them or to cheat consumers or not to care. So governance of human life, governance of systems, governance of provisions is very key, and its quality as a foundation. So ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, we are yet to close January of 2025 with yet another serious aspect. We might have touched it in many aspects, but this touches the environment we're in, touches our food, it touches our health, it touches the economies, and it touches us all. Today, we come in to look at the fate of consumers who consume the highly hazardous pesticides. We wish you to underline the highly hazardous pesticide. We can get them in many forms. But colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as consumers, today we would like to dig and build and also call to action from you as consumers. You call action to your representatives and you call action to businesses. This will fall in line with two aspects: sustainable consumption and production as an SDG 12. So as consumers, we need to be responsible with our consumption, and businesses plus duty bearers must be responsible for the production of goods and services, foods and everything. So colleagues, as I welcome Bernard, I would like to say that the highly hazardous pesticides that we are going to address today is a concern not only to Uganda, but you will find that whether developing or developed country, agriculture plays a vital role of the economy. Unfortunately, as we look at its production and all the value chain with regards to agriculture, there are different chemicals that are being used. But today we are addressing of the highly hazardous chemicals that are bringing in pressing issues that bring risk not only to the economy, but it brings mainly to the consumers, where we find acute poisoning to exposure, causing death, leading into respiratory stress, skin irritation, and many other causes. It brings in chronic health effects. The chronic effects might not be only to consumers, it could go to animals, it goes to the environment. However much we try to regenerate it, the soils fail. So these are aspects which we are going to look at from the Ugandan perspective, but look at it also in your local context. The widespread of its use, the abuse, are there regulations? If they are there, why are they not applied? If they are lacking, why are not they put in place? Is there enough awareness and training of the respective duty bearers to help us address these consequences, this ticking time bomb to our the issues that are going to be raised are not only raised today, they've been raised for the decades, but where is the inaction? These are some of the things that we're going to touch on today. And as we touch them, they are not first, but they will require collective action. When we as consumers, we demand the food, we demand the services, because we need to meet our needs, which are our rights to access safe food. So as we demand to have this and the businesses providing the food, then we also need to demand responsible production, judicious use, and those that are affecting us need not to be put on the market to affect our health as a market. We should be key players on the table as consumers. And this is when I would love to bring in Bennett to unpack some of the work of the Food Safety Coalition and partners and be able to bring to your attention some of the grave and gray situations we are in. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at the closure of January with this series that is going to address the highly hazardous pesticides, a challenge to us all. So Bernard, most welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Henry, for you call it a curtain riser. I am still finding out what it means, but thank you so much, really, for the introduction and giving us the heads up where we are coming from and where we are heading. I think it will also be very good news for me to first report to you that from the previous engagements, where we were talking about communication, there is something interesting that has happened that given our complaint that we submitted to the telecoms, that consumers need to know the cost of a unit. When I call how much is a unit that I'm using, MTN has changed. Now, when you want to place a call, they first send you a notification of how much they're going to charge you per second. That is quite interesting that the consumer voices were heard. I think it is also very important to appreciate that actually whatever we are sharing here is yielding something at the end of the day. We are trying to see how we are adding value to the consumers every time we talk about consumer issues. So it would be very nice that we keep on profiling, documenting, speaking out the issues of consumers. And today, we want really to dive into the highly hazardous pesticides and talk about them and see whether we can make impact either by influencing the big boys to ban the importation or the export of highly hazardous pesticides because they have a high threat to the consumers. And so I'm going to run us through a few things on chemicals. Let me know if, Henry, you're able to see my screen. Yes. I am not sure whether you're able to see my screen.
Not yet.
Okay. So
It's
now
there now. It's
sorry?
there now. I can see it now.
Okay, so all right, thanks. Okay, so of course, I want us to start from the fact that food safety is a very big issue in this country and in Africa as a whole. And one of the most important things that we need to understand is the fact that food safety is not a single man's challenge, it is all of us. And one of the reasons why we have failed actually to tackle the issue of food safety, it's primarily due to everyone who has little money, they want to do it alone. And so people work in silos, people work in small groups, people are working as individuals. And we cannot address the issue of food safety when we are split into individuals and whatever. It needs a consolidated effort. It requires people to come together, put resources together, put their minds together, put everything together to make sure that we fight this war of safety of the food. So based on that background, we decided to organize a group of organizations, individuals, and institutions of learning to come up with a coalition. Can we work together and have a bigger voice so that we can influence issues around food safety? So in 2023, a group of different partners, civil society, academic institutions, even individuals, we came together and we formed what we call the Food Safety Coalition of Uganda, in short known as FOSU. Now, this coalition brings together different partners, different civil societies, different individuals, different academic institutions to really have an umbrella where we can have one voice around food safety. And when we organized ourselves into this coalition, we decided on 4 thematic areas that can actually influence food safety across the country. And we decided that we cannot do anything unless there is evidence that there is a problem. So we came up with thematic areas, and one of the thematic areas was on research and evidence generation. Now, there is a group of people who belong to this coalition who have been mandated in their technical working group to work on research, generate the evidence of these challenges of food safety. So when you have evidence, you're able to influence anything because you have data, you have information, and so you can influence. So this coalition, then one of the thematic areas they work on or it works on is the area of research and evidence generation. But the evidence that we are generating is very specific to anything that is affecting our food safety. Now, when this coalition comes up with a research or a particular evidence, now we use that evidence to come up with messages or to come up with awareness creation messages that we're going to push out to the communities, to the consumers, to the stakeholders, so that we use research to create awareness. So once the research has been generated, another technical group repackages this information and creates awareness materials. So if you go to the link that I've just provided here, if you look at my left corner, there is a link there. You'll be able to get all these sorts of awareness materials that are coming from research, but also you are able to find the research materials that are there. So you'll find research briefs, you'll find research papers, you will find all those materials are available specifically for the context of Uganda. And now we have noted over the years that food safety is being affected by knowledge gap. People don't know. Farmers don't know what to do. Even our leaders, our politicians, our technical persons, people are not aware. So leave alone information, but the capacity to do things is also not there. So we have a whole technical working group that really works on knowledge management. How do we build the capacity of the people, of the stakeholders, of farmers, of vendors, of traders, everybody who is touching food? How do we empower them to be able to bring safe food on the plate? And of course, you can have research, you can have awareness, you can have capacity built, but as long as there's no political will, you may not succeed, you may not go far. So as part of our work, we came up with another thematic area on policy engagement or dialogues. So where we have now advocacy, advocating for food systems that are safe, that are providing nutritious food for people. So this is the snapshot of that coalition. This is what exactly we do. We conduct research, we do awareness, we build the capacity, and then we do advocacy, specifically on food safety. So this is basically a little bit of the preamble of the Food Safety Coalition, currently having 26 members, Consent, of course, being one of the members and other colleagues. So now let us dive into the topic of the day. We are talking about the highly hazardous pesticides and the effect that has to the consumers. Now, before I dive into that, you and I will agree that currently climate change is a real fact of life. Everywhere you go, globally, climate change is a very big issue that we need to address. And if we don't address it, then we are going to go hungry because it's going to affect the production of food that sustains us. Now, for that matter, climate change has also come with other challenges, including the pests and diseases of plants and animals. So we see that there are a lot of pests, a lot of diseases of animals that keep coming up every morning, every day. There's a new pest, there's a new disease, there's a new... So because of these too many diseases and pests that are actually affecting production of food, we see that the scientists have tried to look for solutions to the pests and the diseases. And now one of the solutions that the scientists have come up with, or companies have come up with, are of course the pesticides. Every pest now, they are working hard to make sure that it has a pesticide to respond to it. If the pesticides are insects, a lot of insecticides have been made. If they are fungus and whatever, we have seen a lot of fungicides being manufactured. We have seen a lot of bactericides, if at all the challenge is bacteria. We've seen all these things. We've seen acaricides just to respond to the challenge of pests and diseases in animals and plants. And for Uganda, you will actually learn that almost every village you go to, there is an agro shop, just like you can see in that picture. An agro shop of pesticides, almost in every trading center, you will find one or two in that. So it is all about how do we want to address the pests and the diseases. Now, despite all these challenges, the globe is very concerned that we need to come up with frameworks that we need to use to regulate the production, the handling, the disposal, the usage of chemicals. And so when you look at the global scene, we have the global frameworks on chemicals. If you look at that UN Environment Program, they came up with a global framework on chemicals. Countries have agreed on how chemicals can be handled so that we have a planet that is free of harm from the chemicals and the waste that the chemicals come with. So there is a whole framework there. You can go and read this book. It's a framework, a global framework on chemicals. But also in 2001, and then I think the registration was around 2004, there came a convention called the Stockholm Convention. This talks about how countries should handle pollutants. So most of these chemicals, of course, are pollutants. So now they ratified that countries are supposed to handle waste in a particular manner. They're supposed to handle pollutants in a particular manner. So it provides the guidance on how different states should handle waste and pollutants. And of course, you know that these chemicals are pollutants of the air, pollutants of the environment, pollutants of the water, pollutants of everything. So there are provisions on how those should be handled, how should be manufactured, traded, distributed, used, etc. Now, there's also another convention specifically looking at the transboundary movement of hazardous waste, how countries should transfer these highly hazardous wastes from one country to another. And that is what we call the Basel Convention. Now, the Basel Convention provides for how the countries, if for instance, Uganda is making a particular hazardous chemical, and then it wants to export it to Kenya, it has to notify Kenya about this particular product, and then Kenya has to consent that yes, we can take it up or not. So this Basel Convention, it talks about the prior informed consent that, hey, we have manufactured a highly hazardous chemical and we intend to send it to your country. So they have to inform a country where you are taking it, and that country must sign consent. In other words, it must agree and accept that they can actually receive it. So that is the Basel Convention. It is also in existence. Now, we also have the Rotterdam Convention. Of course, now this one brings the guidance on pesticides. So it's also another big convention that talks about now the pesticides that are not supposed to be traded, that are supposed to be banned, that are supposed to be off them. Those are all provided, the guidance in the Rotterdam Convention. Now, in the African context, we have what we call the Bamako Convention. Now, the Bamako Convention, it is an African framework. And for it, it is basically talking about, it is against the illegal dumping of these chemicals in Africa. It's about the it's against the illegal dumping of highly hazardous waste. So it's more or less of a follow-up on the Basel Convention, but it's totally against Europe or any other country dumping hazardous materials in Africa. So we have all these regional and global frameworks that can actually be used around pesticides. Now, let me give us a case for Uganda. When you look at Uganda, actually the government of Uganda is more concerned about the pesticides more than any other person, I think. That is the assumption I have. And why? Because the Uganda Constitution of 1995 has different sections, and one of the sections talks about the environment, safe environment. It talks about the health, the right to health, the right to a clean and safe environment. All those things are provided for in the Constitution, meaning that Ugandans are protected by the Constitution, that their health is priority to government. And what is impeding the health of the people is actually condemned in the Constitution. Now, they went ahead to even create the Uganda National Environment Act. Chapter 55 specifically talks about these chemicals, how they should be managed, how they shouldn't go and pollute the environment, and etc. The same Uganda has After realizing that the chemicals that are being used in agriculture are continually increasing, many people are using these chemicals. I think government saw a problem that was coming. So our leaders of then started foreseeing a problem coming. And so they came up with what they called the Agrochemicals Control Act. Now, this Agrochemicals Control Act is actually the law that is guiding on the chemicals that are coming in the country. This act actually set up a committee, the Agrochemicals Control Act, a board, actually, it is a board that is supposed to be guiding government on which chemicals are supposed to be accepted, which ones are supposed to be rejected, which ones we cannot work with, which ones, And then that same board is supposed to provide training to the people who are supposed to be using the chemicals. What they call, in this act, they call them the applicators. So everybody in our villages, in our communities in Uganda, who is using chemicals must have been trained by the Ministry of Agriculture under the board that is provided for in the Agrochemicals Control Act. They must have been trained on how to handle chemicals, how to spray, how to protect the environment, how to, all of those provisions are in that Agrochemicals Control Act. Now, away from the board, rather from training these guys, the board is supposed to come up with, of course, the certification for people who are trading in chemicals. They're supposed to certify them. Everybody who is dealing in these chemicals must be certified. Everyone manufacturing them must have a certificate that actually the chemicals they are producing are meeting the requirements. So you see, the country investing in such a law, it's really a big thing. And now currently, government of Uganda is also working on the organic bill the policy is already there. Government of Uganda in 2019 passed what they call the organic agriculture policy. What this means is that the country, the leadership thinks that people can actually do with minimal or no chemicals. So they came up with the organic, that we can actually produce organic food. And there is a whole policy on organic agriculture production. We have it in place as of December 2019. But also currently, the government of Uganda is still thinking that the instruments in place are not sufficient enough to guide the agriculture free of chemicals. Now the country, the government is coming up with what they are calling the agroecology strategy. This is in the pipeline. The drafts are already there. Now, this is a strategy that is saying, hey, guys, we can produce food with minimal or totally no chemicals, and we use nature to produce our food. Now, why would government of Uganda, for instance, invest in all these instruments, put in money, develop them, come up with them, if they did not know the danger of chemicals? Mind you, we don't have a policy on GMOs. It has not passed, but all these ones have passed. So meaning government is so much interested in the subject around chemicals and perhaps in protecting the consumers. That's why these policies are in place. Now, after understanding this policy dynamics, irrespective of having them, now the question would be, so what? What is it that we see? So we see that irrespective of these legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, we've seen the institutional frameworks in place on pesticides and chemicals and whatnot, we see a lot of gaps. They are not being executed. They are not even known, I think, by many people. So now what I'm going to do, I am going to shed some bit of light on the chemicals in Uganda. How are we doing, irrespective of the laws and the policies and the regulations, etc. And I'm making reference to the Food Safety Coalition report of 2024 that was published on the 12th of December, just to give us hints of how the chemical business is running in this country and what are the issues. Now, when you look at the pesticides in Uganda, we see a shift. We see a huge shift in the usage of chemicals. When you compare 2010 and 2022, you will actually observe that the usage of pesticides in Uganda has more than doubled. So in 2010, we used to have people use about 2,990 metric tons of pesticides in Uganda. Those were the tons that Ugandans were using to spray. But by the end of 2022, that figure doubled from 2,000 to 6,000. It's more than double to 6,000 metric tons that now people are using by 2022. And what does that mean? It means that there is a lot of importation. And so there is a lot of money that is being earned from these pesticides. So let us look at a little bit, let us dive into the monetary issues. When you look at the monies that are being earned, you see that still in 2010, the imports were at $32 million, and in 2022, it had risen to $75 million. What that means is that many Ugandans are taking interest in using the pesticides. And in other words, there's a lot of usage of pesticides. So the traders have also invested a lot of money to bring them. So you see that the monetary value of pesticides imported to Uganda have also more than doubled. So you see that from 32 million US dollars in 2010, just 12 years down the road, we are now talking about 75 million US dollars investment in the pesticides in Uganda specifically. These pesticides registered anyway, because I showed you that we have a board up there that is supposed to be registering these pesticides and all that. It is true that at the Ministry of Agriculture, the pesticides that are coming to the country are being registered. For instance, currently, as of end of 2023, the Ministry of Agriculture had registered 115 active ingredients in the pesticides. And these active ingredients have been rebranded, have been put in different brands. And Uganda has, so far as of end of 2023, had registered 669 brands of chemicals. Now, science or scientists have the criteria they use to tell whether these active ingredients or brands are either highly hazardous or not. Now, there are two known international acceptable criteria that you can actually use to know whether the chemical or the active ingredient in a chemical is highly hazardous or not. One of the criteria is called the Pesticide Action Network criteria. Now, when you get these 115 chemical active ingredients in Uganda, and you analyze them according to the Pesticide Action Network criteria, you will be shocked that actually out of the 115 active ingredients, 55 of them, which represents about 47.8% of those legally registered active ingredients in Uganda, are actually known and classified as highly hazardous, meaning that they are just not hazardous to people, but they are highly hazardous according to that criteria. Now you ask yourself, so are we aware, are our people who are doing this work aware of this? Why did they register them if they meet the PAN criteria as highly hazardous? Now, as if that is not enough, when we looked at the registered brands, the 669 brands in Uganda, you will still get shocked that according to the Pesticide Action Network criteria, 459 brands registered in Uganda for use are actually considered as highly hazardous according to that criteria. So you're talking about 68% of the chemical brands in Uganda considered as highly hazardous, meaning they're just not hazardous, but highly hazardous. That is according to that one criteria. But also there's another criteria by World Health Organization and Food and Agriculture Organization called the Joint Meeting on Pesticide Management, the GMPM criteria. Now, according to that criteria, still, when we got the active ingredients, the 115 active ingredients that are fully registered in Uganda, and put them to that criteria, we noted that actually 15 active ingredients are still highly hazardous according to that criteria, and 129 brands still met the criteria as highly hazardous according to this other criteria. So in all respective criteria, we see that Uganda is actually having pesticides on the market that are highly hazardous to human life. Now, as if that is not enough, people have been asking us, but you guys, which chemicals are they? We have provided a list here of the different chemicals that meet both criteria as highly hazardous. So for instance, when you look at carbendazim is one of the chemical compounds we use in agriculture, but carbendazim is highly hazardous. If you look at, okay, maybe the common one that people know is mancozeb. This white stuff you see on the tomatoes, it has been classified both by the GMPM and the PAN criteria as highly hazardous. But this is what we are using on our tomatoes in Uganda every single day. And I have provided a list there, quite a lot of these chemicals that are meeting both. There are about 18 that are meeting both the PAN and the GMPM criteria. Now, these are highly hazardous, but they're being used in Uganda. And surprisingly, they're on the register of MAIF, Ministry of Agriculture. And some of them even exist on the register of the National Drug Authority. So we wonder what is not happening. Okay. Now let us look at whether the chemicals we are using in Uganda are being used in countries where they come from. Very surprising as well. So we note that actually, out of the pesticides that were meeting the PAN criteria, 65% of the chemicals that are being used in Uganda that meet the Pesticide Action Network criteria as highly hazardous cannot be used in the European Union. Very surprising. So we only have 34% of chemicals that can be used in Uganda, but are also being used in the EU. But majority, 65.5% of the chemicals being used in Uganda and that are meeting the PAN criteria as highly hazardous cannot be used in the countries where they come from, and more to be specific, in the EU. So what is this? That the consumer in Uganda should be able to use it, but the consumer in Europe cannot use it. By the way, very surprisingly, I have to inform you that when it comes to the Basel Convention that I talked about earlier, there is need for prior informed consent that this chemical is highly hazardous, but we have manufactured it as Europe, and we intend to export it to Uganda. Please, we are informing you in advance. If you are interested in getting it, please consent. Now, our leaders quickly went and consented. So they gave a prior informed consent that we can actually use these pesticides. And so they landed, the pesticides came, and we are using them, and our people are actually using them. Now, I've also provided a list here of those chemicals that can never be used in Europe, but they're being used in Uganda. All of these chemicals you're seeing, we have them on the register. And they're being used here, but they can never be used in Europe. If you go to the register of Europe, these are chemicals that were banned. By the way, Europe recently banned 200 highly hazardous pesticides for use. They cannot be used there. But very surprisingly, they sent them to Africa and to Asia and other countries. So we have all of these with us. All of these chemicals are approved for use in Uganda, and they're not approved for use in the EU. So what is the problem now of these pesticides? One of the challenges is that all of us are now exposed in one way or the other, indirectly or directly. Now, we have exposure in food we eat. We find a lot of chemicals there. We have exposure in the water we drink. We have exposure in the air we breathe, etc. A lot of exposure. Human beings have been exposed to these chemicals. Then people have been confusing us whether there are any studies that prove that these things are bad to Ugandans and all this. A lot of studies. Now, I just want to share with us a few, of course, for purposes of time. In the northern region, in eastern region, in central region, and western Uganda, a lot of studies have been undertaken, and one of them is this one. A study was conducted to see whether these chemicals are actually present in the water. Samples were collected in April from different water sources, and also in June, when the season was almost ending. Very surprisingly, in April, when the season was just starting, they would find a minimum of around about 7 pesticides present in the water from the different water sources. But when it came to June, when the season was at the peak, you would find around about 25 chemicals loaded in the water sources that we have, where we collected the samples. These samples in April were collected from particular water sources, and it was repeated. The same water sources and samples were picked in June. Surprisingly, the amount of pesticides that were in these water bodies had actually tripled in June. Now you can see these photos can just explain a little bit what I'm saying. A farmer sprays, but he's spraying the spinach, but this is a water source. and then the colleague is already drinking. So whatever is spraying there is already flashing into the water, and someone else is drinking it. And quickly, we see highly hazardous pesticides present in the water. Now, these are the statistics. But what was very important here, you see that glyphosate, which people call Roundup and all that, was very fully present at the highest in all the regions, as you can see. But also these other highly hazardous pesticides were very, very, very present in the water sources of our people, where people are getting water. And of course, the top five were listed here. Glyphosate was one of them. Adicap is the other. Diclovos is another. Atrazine is another. All these are the highly hazardous pesticides that were very present in larger quantities in the water bodies where samples were collected. Other studies have been investigating whether these highly hazardous pesticides are present in the food. It goes without saying, if you look at these tomatoes in Uganda, my fellow Ugandans know that most of the tomatoes we have in the country are having this powdered kind of stuff, what we call mancozeb, one of the chemicals that I indicated that was banned for use in the EU around 2014. Now, this is almost 11 years and Uganda is still using. What a shame. And that is what is on our tomatoes all over. Now, when you check this, you see mancozeb fully present, and someone is already eating raw tomatoes, kachumbari, and all that, but this is already having the chemical. We tried to wash these tomatoes and say, okay, if you wash a tomato with mancozeb and you wash it with cold water, with warm water, or you peel it, what happens? Results indicate that when you peel, the chemical just reduces. It doesn't go off. It just reduces by 69%. Substantially, it reduces by 69%. But you remember, you still have around about 31% present. And then when you wash it with warm water, we see that actually the chemical also reduces by only 38%, meaning that you still have around about 62%. And then when you wash it with cold water, you really see that it reduced only by 30%. So still the chemicals seem to be systemic, and so they are present in the system of the tomato, and people still eat them. And then we also have to reflect on whether, after seeing that the chemicals are in the water, seeing that they are actually present in the food, another question has been asked whether these are also present in the human bodies. Now, this is one of the photos that we can use maybe to learn. Imagine, I want you to imagine this face of this gentleman, the way he is stressed with his face. He's spraying and the face is naked and he's spraying oranges. But you can see this white stuff. This is a chemical bouncing on the tomatoes that bounces back to the nose, to the mouth, the ears, etc. So it is the same to this other colleague. He's naked. So as he sweats, the chemical is entering his skin. As he sprays, it is entering the eyes, etc. So the researchers also indicated that there was highly hazardous pesticides in people's urine. In people's urine, some chemicals were found. For instance, mancozeb, which I kept on talking about, the one on the tomatoes, was found in people's urine. But this mancozeb was banned in the EU in 2014. For us, we are busy using it, and is now present in people's urine. Glyphosate, the so-called Roundup, was also present in people's urine. There is this other thing called 2,4-D. It was also very present in people's urine. So you see that there is a lot of a mess when it comes to these chemicals present in people's urine. And then also people who are using glyphosate, they had particular characteristics that we observed. Many of them had impaired visual memory, language challenges, motor functioning, complex attention. That you sit in a meeting with a farmer and the farmer cannot concentrate for 10 minutes, you know. These are all negative effects on the consumers of these chemicals. So we also saw that people who are using mancozeb and glyphosate, they had poor sleep quality. You go to bed and after 10 minutes, you lose sleep and you can never pick it again. So all those are challenges with the consumers who are actually using these chemicals. Now, other effects that I want to end with in the remaining short time is that WHO, the World Health Organization, and the Food and Agriculture Organization have categorized the different highly hazardous pesticides as carcinogenic. Carcinogenic means that when you eat food that is containing that particular chemical, it will cause cancer. It will cause cancer to the person who is actually consuming that. And what that means is that the different cancers could be the cancer of the throat, the cancer of the esophagus, the cancer of the lungs, the cancer of the kidney, whatever it is. But chemicals can be carcinogenic, meaning they can cause cancer. Others have been categorized as mutagenic, meaning that they can alter or they can change your DNA. And your DNA is the genetic makeup, what I see in you. Like when you see me, Bernard, what I am comprised of is my DNA or my genetic makeup. But these chemicals can alter my DNA. Can you imagine that? They can alter it or they can change it. And then these are some of the effects now that come with humanity when we are eating foods that are endowed with highly hazardous pesticides. Number three is that some of these highly hazardous pesticides are reproductive toxicants. What that means is that when I consume food having those chemical compounds, they can actually affect my reproductive system. So you see people going to have their sexual intercourse, but there is nothing that is happening because your sperms are toxic, or maybe the ovum of the lady is contaminated with these things. So you end up having children or no children, people get barren or people get sterile or whatever, just because we've been consuming reproductive toxicants in food in the name of pesticides. And then also others are endocrine disruptors. What this means is that, of course, each one of us has the endocrine system. The endocrine system is one that generates the hormones that we have. For instance, a man has beards, a woman goes for her menstrual periods. Now, all that is controlled by the hormones, and these hormones are being generated by the endocrine system. Now, in a situation where people are consuming food high in highly hazardous pesticides, these pesticides then will go and disrupt the endocrine system, and so it affects the nature of producing hormones in human beings, and we have a challenge. Others are fatal when inhaled. What that means is that when you inhale a chemical, it can cause death. Just imagine that lady who is spraying. She's spraying, and then the face is open, and she's inhaling that chemical, and so she can die. Assuming that she's pregnant, it can affect the pregnancy outcomes. Assuming the neighbors who are passing by, they will keep inhaling this and can cause organ failure or organ damage. If this mother is in the garden with children, the children are also inhaling, and so it can cause trouble. And then others are toxic to bees. What that means is that the bees can actually die when they have exposure to these chemicals. And you know that bees are the pollinators that we have. So imagine the pollinators that are the pollinators that are dying, pollinators that cannot now pollinate because they are toxic, they have died, they have relocated, etc. This also explains the reason why you cannot see a swarm of bees relocating from one place to another, just because many bees have had to relocate or they have died. And this is not only to bees, but also to other pollinators, but also other microorganisms or living organisms in the soil. And then others are toxic to aquatic organisms. What this means is that when these chemicals go into the water, they can actually contaminate the fish or actually kill the fish. Not only the fish, you have so many, the whales and other living organisms in the water. They are actually at the mercy of all of us. So they can die when they have access to this. And then others are extremely hazardous, meaning that really they are even beyond acceptable to be in society. So that is basically the fate that the consumers have. If we continue using these highly hazardous pesticides, cancer is going to increase, mutagenesis is going to happen, people's DNA is going to keep changing, people are going to have challenges with producing children, people are going to have challenges with the production of hormones, people are going to die, people are going to lose all our pollinators, people are going to have to suffer from the fish is going to die and all this aquatic life, etc. So all these are challenges. And so our recommendations are that really governments, especially in Africa, we need to be more sensitive. Let us ban the importation of these highly hazardous pesticides. Why do we bring what we know is bad? We need to actually ban the highly hazardous pesticides. And in a situation where we have other pesticides, of course, which are recommended, then they must be strictly regulated. We need to enforce the law. We need to implement the laws, the policies that we have set in place. We need to be accountable to our people. We need to train people. We need to create awareness of our farmers, how to use whatever we are using. We need to bring on board other strategies How do we go into agroecology? How do we go into organic farming? How do we support the scientists that are working on biosolutions other than the chemicals? How are we investing in local research to make sure that we are able to make our own products that are actually not highly hazardous? How do we ensure that we actually disseminate all this information? Public awareness, capacity building. How are we investing in laboratories? How are we making sure that our people are understanding these things, and so we're at the same page? But also, lastly, to the ministry, how do we leverage on the global guidance tools? For instance, we have the pesticide registration toolkit. It has all of these things for you to determine which chemical to come and which are not to come. Why don't we leverage on this? So with that, we feel that when our consumers are aware, when government starts investing in sustainable food production, when our people who are in food are understanding how to use these things, when we start enforcing the laws and the policies and the frameworks, then we are good to go. We shall be able to save a community. By the way, as I finish, I want to inform you that many governments assume that when we use highly hazardous pesticides, we increase production and so we are able to get more money from the produce. It is very surprising that every time we produce so much, a farmer produces a lot of food using the highly hazardous and gets a lot of money from the local market, but then all of the money you get, you take it to the hospital to treat cancer. And then you go on even to sell the land where you produced all that too much food. You also sell it so that you can go to India for treatment. Surprisingly, the food that is contaminated with these chemicals is actually rejected on the international market. So still it is them to give us the chemicals, produce a lot of food and eat it by ourselves. One, you eat the food that is contaminated. Number two, you eat the air has already been contaminated. And number three, you get all the money that you have sold and you take it to the hospital to treat yourself. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the fate of the consumers if we are not careful with the highly hazardous pesticides. So, Mr. Chimera, that is, I think, what I can share for now. And I hope that our viewers, our government officials, our policymakers, our civil society organizations, our media teams can be able to pick something from this, and we make a bigger noise and we make sure that the EU is not sending us what they cannot use, and our governments cannot allow in what the other guys cannot use. And Mr. Chimera, as you're giving your closing remarks or whatever it will be, I want to notify you that when we're interacting with the EU about why they are giving us these products and yet they cannot use them, their answer was one, that they have not told us to buy them. Because in the first place, they said, for us, we are producing for the available market. So there is no market in the EU, but there is market in Africa. So imagine if there was no market for highly hazardous pesticides in EU, we couldn't produce them. Number two, we have produced them and we have alerted your governments that we have this product. It is highly hazardous, but we want to import it. We want to export it to your country. And your government has accepted. Now, who are we to refuse the money? I mean, we're a business entity. Your government, we have notified it. We have said, guys, the products are highly hazardous, but we want to send them to you. Please, are you interested? They signed, the prior informed consent was sent to EU that, hey, we can manage it. Please send. And also we send. So why are you blaming the EU when your leaders have signed the prior consent? So these are the perspectives under the circumstances we are working in. But I think with advocacy, we can be able to do so much. I want to thank you for the opportunity, please. Over to you, Mr. Chimera.
Thank you very much, Bernard, and colleagues, wherever you are. This brings out the cat out of the bag, and it also shows the respective weaknesses. Consumer health tells the wealth and health of any given country. Sick consumers depict a sick economy. Sick consumers depict poor quality governance. Sick consumers depict that there is failure to promote ethical and better business, good business. Good business will be reflected in policies, implementation. Good governance will be reflected in investments to make sure that businesses operate effectively and the citizens get the requisite quality goods and services. But through all that has been shared, the frameworks that need prior consent, and then our duty bearers signing knowing that we are importing highly hazardous pesticides or chemicals from Europe, from Asia, from Americas. All that shows that consumers, as beneficiaries of decisions made, are still at risk. It shows that our countries are at risk. So greed plays a major role. So seeing all this burden, fellow colleagues, consumers, we need to take action. Action by speaking out, because the social, environmental, economic burdens are glaring at us. We are not going to realize the SDGs. We are not going to realize national development strategies and programs if the majority, the heart, the foundation of the economies, the consumers, who have got the disposable income to buy the goods and services, weak. So that means the market will not be thriving. So it is very important in our respective categories to take action by maximizing the consumer voices, calling upon our duty bearers, governments, businesses to do better business, consumers getting aware, and choose correct consumption. So with all the recommendations shared, there is a need to strengthen the regulation and enforcement. And you'll find that the regulation and enforcement is strictly with government, the duty bearers. Consumers can only alert. Once we alert government on issues that are affecting us, then we expect enforcement. So this is very key, and we need to continuously speak up. I hope that you have all benefited from today's series, that exposure to highly hazardous chemicals or pesticides does not only stifle our growth and quality of life as consumers, they stifle the economy, they stifle the environment, health of soils. So strengthening the legal and enforcement is going to be very key at local governments, getting extension service providers to understand and do their duty. Issues promote sustainable judicious use of chemicals that are not highly hazardous is going to be very key. The crop or the plant protection products need to be taken into action. Those that are not highly hazardous, used judiciously, but also aspects of integrated pest and disease management. These practices are very key. There are many aspects that bring in biological controls, going in for crop protection to reduce these highly hazardous pesticides that do not give us economic sense. We will need to do awareness of all players, not only farmers, traders, consumers, food processors. We are all victims, like it is said in the smoking campaigns. that second-hand smokers are also dying at a high rate. Even here with chemicals, the known users of chemicals as second-hand affected parties get with changed reproductive system or affected reproductive system, even those that are not yet born get to suffer. So colleagues, this was quite a rich discussion. We are going to continue with it, looking again, food being everything. We are going to still continue looking at food. Your comments, your increased sharing for learning is going to be very key. We need to support sustainable agri-food systems practices that will enable us have safe food that is of quality, safe, healthy, to keep us healthy and productive. Without that, many other hazardous aspects are going to continuously affect us. Some of these aspects trigger underlying diseases, underlying complications in us. We are all at times having sleeping organs, cells that only require triggering, and then we end up being cancerous. So, ladies and gentlemen, wherever we are living in one global world. We need one healthy planet. And as citizens, we have a major role to play. All these hazardous chemicals or pesticides also affect the wildlife. They affect the environment. They affect the air, the waters. One might think we are in a developed world, this doesn't affect us. But winds blow, dust goes everywhere. The limited aspects are very key. We need to have social concern, be environmentally aware, and be critical. So we thank you very much for being part of this session. Let's maximize the consumer voices, call upon the duty bearers, our government, through good governance, increase research, capacity building, sensitization, and implementing frameworks, the regulatory frameworks that can safeguard us. It was a great honor having you all colleagues. Let's keep on sharing and sensitizing and use these tools to advocate for a resilient future for us all as consumers. Thank you very much. Until next Friday, we'll be tackling some of the challenges with food, but we'll be handling aflatoxin still once again, like it happened last year when we were handling aflatoxin in February. Thank you very much. Spark weekend.